Well, hi, Stu Bamey coming to you from Pawleys Island, South Carolina. And in this message, I want to give you some hope for troubled times. I mean, maybe you're dealing with an extended illness or a relational problem, or our world's on fire, China, Iran, the Middle East. Whatever it is that's got you on the run, I want to give you hope. It was the Greek philosopher Philo of Alexandria in 225 BC that compiled the first list of the 7 great wonders of the ancient world. And each of these 7 wonders were astonishing miracles of human design and beauty. And at the top of the must-see list to the ancient travelers were these 7 wonders. And when they would visit them, it would fill them with wonder and awe. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the Colosseum of Rhodes, the Temple of Artemis, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and the Great Pyramid of Giza, which, interestingly, is the only 7 wonder of the ancient world that still remains, that we can still visit. So I got to thinking, well, what if God had 7 wonders of the spiritual world, 7 life-changing wonders for you and me that would fill us with spiritual wonder and awe and astonishment at how great God is and the wonder of his love for you and for me. So I want to look at the wonders of who God is, how he communicates complicated ideas about who he is in simple ways so that you and I can all understand the character and the nature of God. I want to take the individual pieces of who God is and put them together into a single picture so that when we're done, we can see how all the pieces fit together into one great mosaic that paints the true picture of the nature and the character of God, so that we can not only know about God, but we can know God. We can fall in love with God, that we can find a God who can bring us hope in troubled times. And the first great wonder of the spiritual world is that God knows you and me, that our omniscient, all-knowing God knows all about you and me. We're not saying that God is just smart or he's a genius or he got a 1600 on the SAT scores. We're saying there's not one piece of information floating around the universe that God doesn't know about. He has complete knowledge about everything. Hebrews 4:13, nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Nothing in all of creation is hidden from God. All of creation. The universe is a very, very big place. I mean, think about it. We start with planet Earth. It's 25,000 miles in circumference. Planet Earth weighs 6 septillion tons. It spins 1,000 miles an hour, revolving in a 580-mile orbit around the sun. Yet it hangs in empty space, and God knows how it's done. Think about this. The closest star is 4 million light years away. That would be 6 trillion miles. And the closest star is one of millions of stars just in our own galaxy, in our own Milky Way. The universe is a very, very big place, and God knows everything about it. But it's also a very small space, down to insects. There are 10 million insects in the world, 10 million different species, 2,500 different kinds of ants that are usually around my picnic table in the summer. Every molecule, think about this, every DNA, every cell in the universe is known by God. He knows everything. He is omniscient. Not only does he know about the universe, but this is the great spiritual wonder. Not only does he know all about the universe, but there's more. He knows everything about you and me. Absolutely everything. And there are 3 things that I want to share with you that God knows about you and about me. And the first thing that God knows about me is that he knows my fears and understands them. Psalm 56:8. You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. Wow, this is crazy. This is crazy. The longer I've been in ministry, the more I have met people who are wounded and broken and bruised and shattered and have a past to them. And they say to me, well, man, if you knew what went on in my business or my relationships or my home or my marriage or with my mother and my father, my parents, you'd be shocked. It's sort of crippling, isn't it? The hits that we take in life, it's like a tire that we have on a car, a round tire, but if it gets flat, that flat side just goes thump, 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 thump down the highway. And if that thump gets too big in the tire, if it gets halfway up, it would grind that car to a halt. And some of us have tires like that in our lives. And we know that life can get hard, can't it? That there's a lot to be afraid of. You know, the fellow who went to the psychologist and said, I'm afraid to go outside. And the psychologist said, well, why are you afraid to leave your home? And he said, because if I go outside, I could get bit by a snake, or I could get stung by a bee or a wasp, or a car could hit me, come up on the sidewalk and hit me. So I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm just filled with fear. And the psychologist said to him, well, really, you just have a true picture of reality. All of those things really can't happen to you. You just need to learn how to deal with reality. And that's why it's so important to know that God knows us, that there is no scar or wound or bruise that escapes God's attention, no hurt that goes unnoticed. We have never said, as we read, we have never shed a tear that fell aimlessly to the ground, because our all-knowing God has taken note. He's caught that tear in his hand, and he's collected it in his bottle, and he has recorded it in his book. Our God knows everything about you and me. Our God has said, you will never cry alone. You will never shed a tear alone. I am there. I know. I know. There's nothing that can cut a person, you and me, more than the power of a broken relationship. And conversely, there's nothing that can put life back together again like the power of a relationship, especially with the power of a relationship with a loving God who knows you and me, who loves us, who reminds us over and over and over again, you can get through this. You are not alone. Grab hold of me. Grab hold of me and grab hold of this great spiritual wonder, that not only are my fears known by God, but he understands them and catches them in his hand. Yes, he does. God knows me. He knows my fears, and he understands them. But there's more. Not only does he know my fears and understand them, but he knows my failures and forgives them. This is sort of a good news, bad news kind of thing. I mean, let's start with the bad news. I don't have any secrets that are hidden from God. God knows everything about me, from my very, very bad falls in life, and I've had some horrible falls and failures in my life, really have, painful, to the little things like, I just eat too many Oreos at night with milk before I go to bed. God knows everything. It's sort of scary to be known by God, isn't it? I mean, we know that we can't hide from him. Do you remember after the fall that Adam was running around trying to hide from God, put on clothing to cover himself from God, Adam and Eve? God came to them and he said, where are you? Now, God knew where they were, but he wanted to ask them that question because they were hiding. It wasn't as if God didn't know where they were. He was aware of where they were. He was aware of their desire to hide in their fallenness and their failure. It's like you and me. We don't want anybody to know. We just want it to go away. We want to hide. But where can you hide from an all-knowing God? Hey, when I was a little kid, we lived on a farm, and we had a house up on a hill that would overlook the field where I would play. And I'd play with the older boys. And I noticed one day that they were all spitting all the time. So I started spitting. That night when I got home, my mother grabbed hold of me and she said, Stuart, she always said Stuart when she was serious about things, you've been spitting all day long. I saw every little spit from my kitchen window that overlooks the field. I thought, oh man, she caught me. Now, some say that that's exactly what God's like, that God's looking over my shoulder all the time. He's ready to catch me whenever I mess up. and hold me accountable. But that is not the spirit of God's omniscience, of his all-knowingness, that he knows me. God doesn't exist, catch this, God doesn't exist to point out every wrongdoing or failure in my life. The good news is that not only does God know my failures, but he wants to forgive my failures. This is what David experienced with God, the forgiveness of God. He realized that God was not pursuing him to destroy him, but to redeem him. I love Psalm 51, beginning at verse 1. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy steadfast love, according to thy abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions, all my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. I love this. Before God comes to David's sin, and before David understands that God wants to get to his sin, he reminds God of his steadfast love, of his abundant mercy, that God blots out his transgressions. He washes him, he cleanses him, and then he forgives his sins. In the middle of all my mess, I don't have to hide. I don't have to flee from a loving God who knows me. I can be fully known. I can be known fully and intimately by God, which is the desire of every single one of us, to be fully known. The wonder, the spiritual wonder, is to be known intimately by God, which leads to being loved totally by God, which leads to finding our greatest security in God. When we've failed, his arms are open and forgiving and understanding. I can be secure. He not only knows my failures, he embraces them and he forgives them. And that is good news. God knows me. He knows my fears and understands them. He knows me. He knows my failures and forgives them. He knows me. He knows my future and directs it. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. God knows everything that happens in the past. He knows what happens in the present. He knows what will happen in the future. I mean, imagine if you were trading on Wall Street and you could know what was going to happen in the stock market just 30 minutes in advance of the billions of dollars you can make. But we can't. There's a veil in front of the future for us. We don't know the future. We spend all of our time and energy and money, so much of it, trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. We make all of our plans and predictions in the future. I do that every year, and then the year gets so dramatically changed. Most of my life is lived in the surprises. I don't know the future. I can't gaze into the future. There's a veil before my eyes. My knowledge of the future is severely limited because I lack one quality: omniscience. I don't know everything, but our God does. He is eternal. He has absolute knowledge from an infinite vantage point. I don't know what the future holds, but I know the one who holds the future. In the Hebrew, wisdom is not the same as knowledge. To the Hebrew people, it's not the same, wisdom and knowledge. There are a lot of highly educated people running around these days with lots of degrees and lots of knowledge, but that doesn't mean it's wisdom. Biblical wisdom is applying the knowledge that we have from God's perspective. It's understanding all of life from God's perspective. We have this ministry, this online ministry, and I want to thank you for supporting it, for watching it, for being a part of it. It's called Consequential Christianity, that our faith is consequential. It makes a difference in our lives. And the mission, the purpose statement of our ministry is understanding all of life from God's perspective. Yeah. How do we do that? By getting linked up with the infinite, eternal God himself. Then God shares his vantage point, his knowledge, and his wisdom with you and me. When we watch the evening news, CNN or Fox or whoever you watch, they always go to the expert panel. These expert people are going to tell us or predict what's happening and what's going to happen next. But they're doing that from a limited, finite perspective, trying to analyze science and technology and government and politics and all the things that are going on and understand what's going to happen next. Interestingly, God is left out of the equation. There is one expert who is not on the panel, and that is God. And God can give us the wisdom to understand the future. We understand the past, how to make it new. We understand the present, how to live in it, and we can understand the future in terms of who we're to be, to allow God to lead and guide and direct us into that unknown future of how we are to live. See, one of the wisest things we can do is to submit our lives to the wisdom of God. God doesn't give us commandments to be bossy or to show us who's in charge or to restrict us in life. He gives us wisdom, guidelines, commandments, because he knows that's what works and leads us into the future. God knows what works and what doesn't, and he can let us in on that. So the first great wonder of the spiritual world is that our all-knowing God knows all about the universe, all about our world, and all about you and me. He knows my fears and understands them. He knows my failures and forgives them. He knows my future and can direct me and lead me and guide me so that I can let go and simply trust in him. Yeah, our great God is an all-knowing God who wants to know you and me. And if you don't know God, you can simply say, Lord, I receive you into my life as my Lord and Savior. I want to come to know you. I want to spend the rest of my life getting to know who you are. And if you do know Jesus, I'm just going to encourage you today to surrender up your life and my life to God. I'm just going to encourage us to say, I release it. You know everything. I don't. Why wouldn't I simply trust you this day with my life? Our God is an all-knowing God. He knows everything about you and about me. This is the first great wonder of the spiritual world.